Hey, how's it going everyone, and welcome back to my series, Which Game is Better? If you are unfamiliar with this series, what I do is take two games from the same genre and compare them in 4 different categories, which are story, gameplay, open world, and presentation. In each category, I will compare the games and give them each points based on what they do better, and I will display those points now on screen. By the end, we will have a final score, and whichever game has the most points is declared the winner and the better game. Quick disclaimer before I get the video started, this video will contain no spoilers for Valhalla or Origins, and this video is made up entirely of my opinion, so there's no need to get totally angry or offended if my opinion is different than yours. Anyways, without further ado, Assassin's Creed Valhalla versus Assassin's Creed Origins. The first category we are going to compare these games on is story, and let's start with the protagonists. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, we have Eivor, a member of a Viking clan, who after having a difference in opinion with his king, decides to move to England with his brother and a few others to start their own clan and conquer England. Eivor is a pretty solid character. He's a very focused, cunning warrior who knows exactly what he wants and fights and works in any way he can to achieve his goals. Eivor also has his own personal motivation as he wants to restore and bring honor and glory to his family name after his father was denied Valhalla in death. I played as the male version of Eivor and I found him really enjoyable. He can be humorous and charismatic at times, and at others he can be a stubborn and ruthless warrior, not to mention his fantastic voice work. Eivor's relationship with his brother Sigurd is what keeps him grounded and humanized, and you can see many examples in the story of the lengths he will go to protect his family and clan. Eivor cares. He isn't emotionless or careless like many characters can be, and after the very long 60-hour main campaign, you become pretty attached and invested with his character. On the flip side, we have Bayek from Origins, who is in a similar but different situation. Bayek is a former Medjay of Siwa and is sent out on a personal mission of revenge after the Order of Ancients forces him to accidentally kill his own son. Bayek's story is very tragic and emotional for him, and you can see him struggle with it as he often unleashes his built-up rage and hatred throughout the story as he aims to destroy the Order of Ancients. However, just like how Eivor has Sigurd to keep him grounded and humanized, Bayek has his wife Aya, who brings out the best and happy side of Bayek that is so non-existent through a large portion of the game. And it's in these few moments of happiness you can really see what a fleshed out and three-dimensional character Bayek is. Many people can relate and associate themselves with a lot of the feelings and pain Bayek feels throughout the story, and that's what makes him such a great character to connect with and root for. So much so that it actually makes you feel like you are Bayek. Eivor gives you this feeling in moments, but with Bayek it's a constant thing and it comes full circle at the end, which has many fans, including me, begging for a Bayek sequel. Eivor is a good character, but Bayek is a great character, so the first point goes to Origins. Next up is the villains of both games. The Order of Ancients are present in both of these games and a big antagonist in the stories. I'd say the Order of Ancients is definitely a lot more present and involved with the story of Origins, while in Valhalla they are sometimes the villain, while other times it could be a random villain like King Alfred, for example. In Valhalla, it's a lot less clear who the main antagonist is and the driving force of the plot. It's not even really revealed until the end, making the story feel a lot less focused compared to Origins. Now, there are some great standout side villains in Valhalla, many of which are from the Order of Ancients, but in Origins, I feel like it is made very clear from the start what your goal is and who you're after. While in Valhalla, it's kinda just a lot of side villains you go through until you reach the big boss at the end. I'm trying my best to explain this without spoiling it, so I'm just going to say that both games have lots of betrayal and those wow moments with their villains, but overall I think Origins villains had a much deeper and personal connection to the main character Bayek, and there was just so much deep hatred in that rivalry that I think it was more intense and intriguing to see, so this point also goes to Origins. The next point we are going to talk about is plot, and this goes pretty hand in hand with the first 2 points, but something I haven't mentioned yet that is pretty noticeable is the pace in both games' stories. Valhalla is a very slow burn for the main story. The main story is extremely long, about 20 hours longer than the main story from Origins, and when you have that long of a story, there's going to be a lot of filler. The whole plot is based around gaining these alliances with your clan, and they all have these long story threads that eventually lead to your alliance, and at first I really liked this, but once you do these alliances 5, 6, 7 times, they start to get really boring and long, and the game's story starts to feel more like a grind as opposed to an entertaining journey. Don't get me wrong, Origins has a few of these filler moments moments too, but the game's story just feels a lot more focused, and pretty much everything you're doing is working to forward the plot, and there's a really cool payoff. While in Valhalla, it's more like you're running around doing favors for everyone, just ignoring the main plot until it decides to come back and become part of the main story again. So once again, another point to Origins. The final point for the story category is the Assassin's Creed lore of both Origins and Valhalla. Both of these games are part of what us AC fans are now calling the RPG trilogy, and what was so worrying about this new RPG style is that the games were starting to have a lot less Assassin's Creed lore, and instead just making completely irrelevant stories to the overall Assassin's Creed arc. Cough, cough. Thankfully, Valhalla mostly corrected the mistakes of the one that shall not be named, and brought back a lot of AC lore. Still not quite as much as I'd like, but I think they did a really good job with the modern day storyline in particular. But I would have liked to see more lore present in Eivor's story. We did have Hytham and Basem, but that was really about it, and it really seemed like Eivor's story was more focused on Asgard as opposed to the Assassin's Creed. Bayek's story is a lot more tied into the Assassin's Creed story and lore in general, and I can't really say how because it will be a major spoiler, but it's really cool to see, and there were many moments that made me feel super nostalgic. And I think the ending was really beautifully laid out and created, so Origins takes every point from the story category. Now, let's move on to gameplay, and the first thing I want to talk about is combat. Origins started the trend of the new combat styles for Assassin's Creed, as it did away with the flashy, free-flowing combat for this more RPG Witcher-style combat. I, for one, am not really a fan of the new RPG combat system, and in Origins, the combat just feels really slow and tedious. I don't mind the shield and timing up parries with the shield, but the kill time is much too long, and there isn't a lot of cool skills or abilities you can bust out, and the finishers are nowhere near as cool as some of the other ones from the series. Valhalla definitely builds upon the combat from Origins and makes some little tweaks and improvements. Probably the most notable is the ability to dual wield with any two weapons of your choice, which is pretty cool and adds more variety and combos to the combat. There's also some more abilities that are all pretty unique and fun to use, but once again, that combat still just has that really long and tedious grind to it with these long kill times. There is a little more depth with the weak spots on enemies and the stun attacks, and the finishers look really brutal and awesome, but it's just still not great, at least not for me. I definitely prefer the older AC games combat, and even Ghost of Tsushima, but we'll talk about that for another video. So even though I'm not a fan of Origins or Valhalla's combat system, this point does have to go to Valhalla because it just builds upon what Origins did with more weapons, combos, abilities, and finishers. Now let's talk about stealth. This is a pretty easy one. Stealth in Origins is alright. It does have the hidden blade, chain assassinations, different abilities, and the bows, but it's just very basic. Valhalla's stealth is a lot better, and that is almost solely because of the return of social stealth. Being able to crowd blend or blend in by doing tasks or sitting down and eating with random NPCs makes the game feel a lot more strategic and actually makes you feel like an assassin. The hood and cloak also look really sick. I wish you could wear it during combat as well, but whatever. The stealth kills with the hidden blade are super satisfying, and there's a much larger variety to the kill animations opposed to Origins, so an easy point for Valhalla. The last point for gameplay is the customization of both games. Again, Origins is the first Assassin's Creed game to have these RPG mechanics and features, and that is reflected in the customization. There were a lot of outfits and weapons you can find throughout the world and equip to Bayek. The loot system is pretty bloated, and it can be often overwhelming at times. It is nice that you can dismantle and sell a lot of these weapons and equipment, but still a lot to keep track of. Nowhere near as bad as Odyssey in this regard, but Origins still has a pretty bloated RPG loot system, and I talked about this a lot in my Assassin's Creed Valhalla review, that how the loot and customization in the game is much more focused and less bloated compared to Origins and Odyssey. You don't get new weapons and gear every 5 minutes, and instead you will get some gear every once in a while, and you will continue to enhance and upgrade that gear as you progress in the game, and you can go hours before finding any new equipment or weapons, and I personally think this is so much better. I no longer had to spend so much time in my inventory checking all the little different stats and gear ratings and having to switch out gear every 5 minutes. Instead, I could just leave it alone and progressively upgrade it as I leveled up and became more powerful, and I'm really glad Ubisoft listened to the community on this. Customization goes to Valhalla. Moving on to open world, this is a close game once again, with Origins holding the narrow lead over Valhalla 4-3. And the first thing we're going to talk about is location. Origins takes place in ancient Egypt, while Valhalla takes place in 9th century England and Norway. Valhalla's England is mostly lush green fields and hills with some rugged cities and settlements. It does a very good job of capturing that Viking feel with lots of longhouses, raids, monasteries, and the large open cities make a great Assassin's Assassin's playground. Ancient Egypt mostly consists of sand, desert, with some really cool and vibrant, lively cities, and historic landmarks like the pyramids and the Sphinx, and lots of cool little tombs and caverns to explore and loot. I do think both locations work very well and are really cool to see in the Assassin's Creed series, and was just cool to see in video games in general. But I am going to give this point to Origins, because just seeing ancient Egypt brought to life in an Assassin's Creed game no less was extremely surreal, and I just think overall the world has a lot more to see and explore compared to Valhalla, where there is lots of empty space. Next up are how each game handles the side quests and side activities. Origins' leveling system heavily relies on side quests. In fact, you need to play a lot of the game's side quests in order to be a high enough level for the main missions, and this is probably my biggest issue with Origins. I really hate the leveling system and how it relies on side quests, because it takes away the player's choice and forces you to play the game a certain way. Some players just like to play all the main story at once and then go back and do the side quests, and other players like to play all the side quests first and then complete the main story, and others prefer to just not touch the side quests at all. And this leveling system forces you to play both side quests and main quests simultaneously. In Origins, you pick up the side quests by just stumbling upon them while exploring the map, or by heading to a quest board where you're given this long list of side quests to complete, and again, you don't really have a choice whether or not you want to do them. Some of the side quests can also be really long and boring. Some are fun, but again, that's why it's nice to have the option. Valhalla heavily addressed this issue and did away with that leveling system from Origins, and instead introduced power levels and replaced the long and grindy side quests for brief and enjoyable world activities that you can find by just traversing the world. These world activities are quite enjoyable and often comedic, and do a really good job of balancing the dark tone from the main story. The world activities could be something completely ridiculous, and it made it very enjoyable and often hilarious to play. Side quests are just overall much better done in Valhalla, so it's an easy point there for Valhalla. The last point in the open world category is immersion. Both games are very immersive and both have lively and interactive worlds, and both do a great job of embracing their respective time periods. Valhalla has things like drinking games, raids, and feasts that just scream Vikings, while Origins has pharaohs, pyramids, kings, queens, and it screams Egyptian. This is a very tough point to decide because both games just do a very good job of making you feel like you're part of the world. But overall, I found Origins to just make me feel more a part of the world. It may just be because of the time period, but when I got that viewpoint atop the pyramids, it was such an amazing feeling, and it really felt like I had gone back in time and was seeing ancient Egypt through my own eyes. The place that I had heard so many stories and tales about was brought to life, and that feeling was incredible. So a well-deserved point for Origins. It is now 6-4, with Origins remaining in the lead heading into our final category, presentation, and let's start with graphics. Obviously, since Valhalla just came out not even a month ago, it has a direct advantage in graphics because Origins came out in October of 2017. Origins still has some really good graphics, and the two games have very similar looks, but Valhalla just has some slightly sharper textures and some much better lighting, although the facial textures and animations seem a bit worse to me in cutscenes though. Valhalla doesn't actually even have some of the new fancier next-gen features like ray tracing DLSS, so it really isn't that much of a difference from Origins, but the game just overall looks a bit sharper and cleaner to me, so point goes to Valhalla. The next point is performance, and this one has a clear winner, and that is Origins. The game runs better with higher performance on PC, and Valhalla in its current state still has a lot of bugs and frame drop during raids and large battles, along with some crashing issues on console. So the point goes to Origins, and this brings us to our final point, soundtrack. Like I've said in all my other which game is better videos, soundtrack is always the most controversial point because everyone has different music tastes and preferences. And let me just set the record straight, I love both soundtracks from Valhalla and Origins. They have some really great music that just feels Assassin's Creed, but I personally prefer Valhalla's soundtrack because it's the ultimate team up of Jesper Kyd from the original AC games and Sarah Scheffner from Origins, and they just make some beautiful tracks. Ezio's Family and Viking rendition was great, and they also made a rendition of the Assassin's Creed 1 stealth theme, which was super nostalgic for me, so the point goes to Valhalla. This brings us to an extremely close final score of Assassin's Creed Valhalla 6 and Assassin's Creed Origins 7, leaving Assassin's Creed Origins as the winner and the title of the better game. This was an extremely tough and close which game is better to make, and by far the hardest to make so far. I do believe Origins is a better game, but just slightly, and if you think Valhalla is better, I can totally see where you're coming from. Valhalla is definitely stronger gameplay wise, but Origins just has such a great story and open world that it just edges out Valhalla on this one. And if you watch this video wondering which game you should buy, then let me just say you should get both games. They are both great and a lot of fun, and I promise you, you won't be disappointed by them. I hope now that Assassin's Creed has dabbled in open world RPG games with Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, I am praying and hoping we return to the old formula with more story focused games with rich lore and great stealth with fast paced and flashy combat. But you guys already know my opinion, and now I want to hear yours down in the comments. Which game do you think is better and why? And would you have scored the games differently? Feel free to share your opinion in the comments and we can all discuss it together. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. We are almost at 10,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in playing or talking games and videos with me and others, feel free to join my community Discord server. The link is in the description. Other than that, thank you for watching and have a blessed rest of your day, Assassins.